if you don't know me, my name is Kate Fossen, and I am the founder of Brand Pollinators, where we support impact-driven brands, help them amplify their message and connect with fellow impact brands to make a bigger change in the world. And here we do our monthly community call to help connect those brands and also to share insights from experts that may be able to support you in your growth and help inform some ways that we can make a bigger impact together. So today our guest is Caitlin Harper. She is the founder of Camaraderie, which is an organizational change consultancy that helps small purpose-driven companies like we do to create, navigate, and communicate change. For the past 15 years, she's been designing project people, and communication strategies for organizations ranging from rebrands to growth strategies to tech rollouts to people and culture transformations. And her approach is unique because she blends strategy and creativity, and then helps guide leaders not just to navigate the change, but to learn how to lead their organizations through change long term. So Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. And it's funny because my name is Caitlin also, and my family has always called me Caitlin. And so I go by Kate at work, but I go by Caitlin with like my family. So it's kind of funny. I was like, oh, Caitlin.
I know. I was going to say, my mom and her sisters are the only people that call me Kate.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm like, I can't respond to it in public. I'm like, that's not me.
Okay, I don't know who that is. Yes. So Caitlin, great to have you. So just to get us started, I mean, when I first talked to you, I heard about change management and I was like, okay, this means like big corporate merger or something, but that's really just like one little tiny piece. So how do you define organizational change management and like, who is it for?
So I define it as any time an organization's going through change, right? Like the whole change management. Well, first of all, the way that you think is the way that almost everyone thinks. So it's not like you're weird or not alone. Like everyone thinks that. So they're like, oh, you work for McKinsey and you lay people off. And I'm like, what? No, that's never what I would do. Like, oh my gosh. Saying it's like M&As and all these like giant, Fortune 500 transformations is the same as saying like all companies are Fortune 500s, right? The majority of companies are not that, but those are the ones we hear about all the time. Similarly to organizational change. And it's kind of the reason that I do what I do, because I have been managing change my entire career, and I had no idea that that was like a thing that had a structure or a process or was a thing, right? Until I had managed like a multi-year change project, and some fancy guy in a suit was like, they pay people a lot of money for what you do. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, change management. And I was like, absolutely. I know what that is. And went home and like Googled change management and was like, oh, what? Like this is, you can study this in college, like all this stuff, like what is going on? So it's literally the practice of, well, the fact is, you need a structured approach, right? It's a structured approach or applying a strategy to change is what change management is. And that's the reason that a lot of organizations aren't doing change management, because they're changing without a structure or a strategy or a framework or a methodology that they're using. They're just like blasting through change and like hoping for the best. And that's why I serve impact businesses because that's what I'm passionate about, but I serve small businesses because everybody changes. So like a quarter of my clients are solo founders, and they are not who in my mind, I'm helping their organizations move through change. So that's all that it is. Moving from the status quo to the future state. Strategy.
Oh, so interesting. So one of the things that makes me think of is like just the terminology. Like, do you have a hard time connecting with these impact brands that are smaller because they're picturing change management as something else? I mean, it seems like you'd have to do some like education around that in order to get that work.
Yeah, I feel like 80% of my job is education. Like a lot of times, like people that I work with have never even hired a consultant for something. They have like a lawyer and an accountant, and then they're like, we're going through this massive thing. So a lot of messages that I get are like, is this change management? Like, is this change? And I'm like, it is in fact change. Like, wonderful. But they don't see it as something that they can do, just like they have, like small companies have to look up a lot of stuff. Right? Like, when do I start doing a performance management system for employees? When do I start using a marketing strategy? When do I need to have a sales strategy? You know, when am I not doing sales as the founder anymore? When am I hiring my first sales hire, or whatever the strategy is for different areas of the business? Change is another area of the business that touches all areas of the business. So that's kind of the message, right? It's like, if things are changing, which they are, have a strategy for doing that rather than just like plowing through.
And why would you say that it's better to hire somebody to help with that rather than just like go for it and see what happens? I mean, like, what are the benefits of having like somebody support you through, or bringing in a consultant for something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same reason someone would get a coach rather than trying to coach themselves. I think that everyone can coach themselves. Like, you can get a certain amount done with journaling and reflection and asking yourself good questions, etc., which is the same way that you build a strategy. But if you're hitting a wall, then, or if a change, I usually get a call when something's not going well. And then after that, people learn to be more proactive. That's, again, that's the way it happens a lot, right? You launch a product and you realize that you don't have like the infrastructure to support the manufacturer or whatever. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, how did I not see that? Like, it's because you're too close to the situation. But as I said, like, I taught myself how to do all the stuff that I do, so it can be done. I wish that maybe I'd had some resources back in the day, or someone to say like, maybe we should get a professional in here and you can learn from that professional. So there are a lot of resources out there. It's just whether or not you have the time or the interest in doing it yourself, right? You choose who you hire for different areas of your business. I have friends who do all their own accounting, and I'm like, that isn't me. Exactly. It won't be me. Like, I don't think so. So yeah, you choose where to put your resources. But usually it's because something's a little off and they're just like, I wonder if this can be better.
And something that really struck with me that you talked about is like, that when you navigate change, that is how your company operates, and that is what your company culture is. So can you expand on that? Because I think that that's so important to like realize that it's not just like, oh, we're in a change right now and then everything's going to be fine once I just figure this out.
Yeah. I feel like that's another like that's a little bit of a trickle down from, you might also hear my cat screaming because I'm on Zoom and she knows now. So disregard, she's fine. She sounds like she's dying, but she's cool. That's like a little bit of a trickle down from this like theoretical, like MBA management school thinking, is like, we are going to do a change. Like, we're going to do a merger. And that has a start and an end. It doesn't have an end, but whatever. Has a start and an end. And here's the structure to go through it. And here's the project management office and the change management office for the people and blah, blah, blah. And a million people are working on it. And I'm like, what? Like, that's not how anyone outside of that bubble operates. And the way that you change, right, is the way that you operate. If you're changing every single day, like if you are a move fast and break things type of leader, and that's the energy that you bring in, and you test and stuff fails and you test again and blah, blah, blah. And like that's how you're going to change as well. That's how you're going to navigate change. And that can be fine. It's not my style particularly. But you can do it, right? People might not love it, right? It might affect certain things. You might attract a certain type of person. Similarly, if you're like, we move slowly and intentionally and we grow a certain way, and, you know, we're trying to scale a business, you know, over time, and here's our 15-year plan or something like that. Like that's a different way to run your business. It's a different culture. And it means that you're changing in a different way. You might have a giant strategy. You might, like I do tend to work with organizations that are going through growth, but they are extremely focused on their people. And if you're very focused on your people and the well-being of your people, things have to happen a little bit more slowly, not because the people don't want to do it, just because there's more communication, right? There's more attention paid to stakeholders. You get more feedback, like things like that. And that takes time. But that's like if your culture is like how we do things around here, if you're changing every day, then change is your culture and change is your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so true. It's not just like there's no end to it. Even if you are thinking really long term, like there's always going to be things. And there's also things that happen, like not that you self-impose, but things that are an outside influence that cause change. I mean, what is more common, would you say? Is it things that people are like, we're going to make a change? Or is it like, oh crap, we need to make a change now because something else?
Yeah, because something's occurring. Like, I feel like that two things. What is more frequent? That is up. I mean, that's a little bit based on industry, but not totally. You can have like a CPG company that is like, I don't know, just been around for ages, King Arthur Flour or something like that.
Yeah.
Just like, we're here, right? Like whatever. Maybe they respond to change. Maybe they just like sell some more flour. Or like, you know, a company that's doing vegan cookies and it's like trying to get into all these shops and blah, blah, blah. Like they're self-imposing change. They want to grow really rapidly. They want to disrupt a market. So it can be self-imposed by the leader or the need. And I think that people see external changes as changes more often. Like, oh, something is happening to me and I realize that this is a change, because often we talk about a change curve a lot in change. And this is a reason that leaders need to take a step back sometimes and understand like everybody else impacted, even if it's one person or your future employees. Like, how is this going to be perceived by other people or your customers? The leader, if they're leading a change or if they decided on a change, they're already like bought in. They're at the top of the change curve. It's their change. Whereas anyone else you're talking to is like, I have no idea what you're even like, you interrupted my coffee to tell me what, like you're changing, and it's the leader's responsibility to bring that person up the change curve to take ownership over this change. So when it's an external force, the leader is also at the bottom of the change curve. So they recognize it as a change, whereas they're already done their change journey if they're imposing the change. So I feel like it's like if you decide something in your house, if you decide you're going to put all the pots and pans on the bottom shelf instead of the top shelf, you know that you did that because you did it. And it was your great idea, because it's better to bend down than to reach up. And you already know all this stuff. And then your partner, your roommate comes home and they're like, where the hell are the pots? Right? Like, what? And you're like, I'm a genius. And this is great. And they're like, even if it is great, it happened to them. And they're like, you know, there might be a little bit of resistance. And then we get friction, et cetera, et cetera. So I use like home-based explanations a lot in my work because I'm like, that is change management,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I'm laughing because like basically every time I go to my mother-in-law's house, I'm like, oh, you should be having this organized this way. It's like
right.
around. Like I finally learned like, oh, she doesn't want you to just come in and change things.
But you're
I'm
like,
getting
I am
better.
doing you a service, like this is like a good idea. And like, if you really wanted to change it, you could apply some change management practice, right? If you wanted to be there,
Yes.
you could do that. But like whenever I do like a public talk or anything, and I'm like, here are some things you can do. Go home and try them. Like try using these communication tools in a different way and try, asking someone for feedback in a certain way, see what happens. Try bringing someone into a decision making them think it was their decision, like all this stuff that just happens in everyday conversation.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it brings me on to this other point too of like, there's definitely different levels of like tolerance for change or excitement about change. So would you say when you're trying to like get people on board that you're trying to get them like all to come to, I mean, obviously not like all to come to exactly your agreement, but like how do you like, are there different levels of where you want people to be included, or how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to get everyone to take ownership over the future state. So they are completely bought in to the future state. They champion this new way of working or doing things or whatever. And the future state sounds like very like, future state can literally be like, sign up for a different tool that we're using for project management. Hey, everyone, we use Asana. We're switching Monday. Like, I need everyone to sign up, use it, make an account, like get in there, transfer things over, like da. And, one person's going to be like, I knew the person who started Monday and they're an idiot. I'm not saying this, but like, right? Like I have a personal issue with this thing and I'm not going to do it. And someone's like, I love change and I can't wait for this to happen. Like, let's go. And they don't even know what the change is. They just love change. And then on the opposite end, right, it's the person who's just like, I still write things down and I never use the first project management tool in the first place. Like, it's just and you can have 5 people on your team, 5 different personas. And that's amazing when you're doing things like building a company, because you have all these different people like contributing their different thoughts and like backgrounds and blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes to change, you're like, only 5 people work here and I have 5 different stakeholder types that I have to communicate with. Like that is annoying. But then it becomes, is it in your best interest to do it or not? Right.
Right.
So as a leader, what's the ROI on applying a structure? And that's the number one thing that I try to do with everyone, whether it's just learning or clients or anybody, people on the street who happen to mention the word change. I'm like, anyone can apply this to anything and you just need to know how to scale it. So understanding how your organization changes, like I said before, like 25% of my clients are solo founders. Maybe they have a couple of contractors or something. Getting them a framework for how they as a leader change, communicate, how they want their organization to be, how the organization operates, what their values are, blah, blah, blah. And having a change strategy that they can scale up and down for different things, I think is like one of the foundational parts of having a business that you want to grow. Because you have that strategy in your back pocket and you can use it at any time. So teaching people how to scale strategies is something that I think is missing from a lot of the traditional, because they just want you not, I mean, some management consulting firms want you to, they want it to be a secret. They want you to kind of like need them, right? Like, if you're a practitioner, are you a vampire or are you a teacher? Like, there's two different ways to do it. But like, I want the companies to grow, right? Like that's my end goal, is to fulfill their mission. So I feel like, yeah, learning to scale strategies and the framework that you use to change, you can apply to other problem solving as well. Like the questions you ask yourself, the mindset that you get in to solve for a future state, that can be applied to marketing, sales, ideating new products or anything like that. Like, what do you want the future state to be and how are you going to get there? And then how are you going to bring people with you on that journey of future stateness or whatever,
Yeah. Oh man, it's like, it makes so much sense to be scaling those strategies over time, because then you're like you said, you're always going to have some kind of change happening, and then, something else comes along and you want to be able to keep people going with you. So
Yeah.
like, what if there's like people that are super resistant to change? I mean, I know you said that it's good to look at the ROI of like, do we really need to make this change? Which I think is a really good point, because it's like, what's your ultimate goal there? But like, do you have any like suggestions or like advice about what to do when people are really resistant to that change?
Yeah. If someone's resistant to change, I want to know why they're resistant to that change. And this is another thing, like, is it worth it for you, not only to make the change, but is it worth it for you? Like, especially when your margins are thin, you just are constantly calculating ROI, right? Like, if I put my resources here, is the payoff enough, right? So if you are having a small change where you're like, you know what? It's a small change, but it's going to happen and no one has any choice and they might resist it. But at the end of the day, they might be upset because they don't like change, but it's not really like the worst thing that's ever happened. I might just be like, hey, you have to use Monday or whatever, And if you want to participate in the projects, you're going to sign up. And I love you. Please do it. And there's other things where I'm like, why are you resisting? Because even with the same thing, like someone could actively speak out against whatever change you're doing, right? People could, I don't know, launch a campaign against it, or, be just like bad mouthing other things or anything like that. Understanding why they're resisting is really important. So, what matters to that person? Like, why are they resisting because they don't like change? Are they resisting because they have an emotional attachment to the status quo? Or are they resisting because there's some sort of fear involved, like fear of the future or whatever it is? Do they just like pitting themselves? Like, are they like a devil's advocate kind of person? Like, what is it, right? And then what do I need them to do? Move to the future state. And then what matters to this person, right? So there are some tactics, I wouldn't say they're strategies, but that work in general, is using that person's passion for the greater good. So being like, hey, you have a lot of thoughts about this transition. Like, can we meet one-on-one so I can hear you out? Like that, more often than not, gets the person to be like, oh my God, they want to hear my thoughts. And then I just lay out my reasoning, right? I'm like, this is why we need to do this. This is how I came to this. And I really wanted you to understand this. And more often than not, that smooths things over that are smaller, right? Just that like very personal touch for understanding someone's resistance and where it comes from. You can leverage change champions that are near that person. So if there's someone in the organization who everyone likes, I always know who that person is. Get them on board with the change, right? Get them to talk it up, bring people in, like it's the cool kids table kind of concept. So there are a couple different things that you can do, these like tactics that change people's behavior. But yeah, just understanding. I tell people, like, I lead with compassion. I'm like, I want to relieve suffering. And suffering sounds like a lot, but asking someone to change is like harmful in that you're disrupting the status quo for them.
Mhm.
So that's the way that I see it. Even if I'm like, everyone here gets $1,000, right? Everyone gets $1,000 bonus because we did a really good job. And a leader will say, that is amazing. And everyone is going to love this. And I'm like, why do you think more people who win the lottery are say their lives are worse after they win the, right? Like people are going to be like, why does everyone get $1,000? I've been here for 10 years. Why does everyone get $1,000? I bring in more money to this company than anyone else. And it's like that person just started and I've been here, you know, all this stuff. And you're like, this was an objectively good move. There are no objective good moves ever. And that's a problem that leaders, that's a trap, right?
Mm.
So understanding like, if I do this objectively good thing, where are the pockets of potential suffering?
Mhm.
Who's going to be upset by this thing? And getting upset is fine. I just want the person to completely change their mind and agree with me forever, right? And like what's the strategy to do that at work?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it reminds me, like, I'm just thinking back to this time I was working with a company and they wanted to implement this new POS system. It was like a retail operation. And so they wanted to implement this new POS system. And so I was like a super early adopter. I'm like, oh, cool. I want to learn this new thing. And so I started messing with it. And then people started asking me questions about it. And so I became like the change management person for this whole implementation of like a new system. And like what you were saying about the personal touch really reminded me of like how I went through that process. It was just so much one-on-one. It was like talking to people like, okay, did you try this? Like, how did it work for you? And why didn't you like it? And just like getting each person's perspective and seeing like where people were frustrated with it or what they had tried or what they were like scared of or whatever. And just like in those individual conversations, I felt like it was probably one of the most fulfilling projects I had worked on in my career up until that point, because I was like helping to usher some new thing in, but it didn't feel like it was about me. You know, I felt like I was helping like the whole organization come together around something. And so I think that was a lesson that I've carried with me about a lot of different things I do. I tend to focus more on those one-on-one connections with people to get people to come along rather than, just kind of like, this is how we do things now.
yeah, well, that's like people who are super connectors are change makers, right? Like whoever you're connecting, those two people didn't know each other before. They didn't have a solution for whatever it was that they needed. Sometimes they don't even know what they need. And you see the big picture of what could happen and you bring those people together. So that's what I tell people. I'm like, all communication is change communication. Like, I tell people, I'm like, tell me a communication that is not trying in some way to change someone's behavior, even
Mhm.
saying thank you. You
Mhm.
want someone to now feel like, know that you're feeling gratitude toward them. Maybe you want them to repeat that action again. Like it's
Mhm.
all in, like all interaction between humans is change. But I felt the same way. Like, I feel like I got into this way, way back in the day because people were like, you're a writer, right? Like, I sent this email and I wanted everyone to do this thing and nobody did it. And can you just like read it and tell me what you think? And I'm like, sure. And I
Mhm.
read the email and I'm like, why on earth did you think this email was going to do anything? Like, this is the worst email I've ever, I mean, I never said that, right? But sometimes
Mhm. Mhm.
they're like, this email is pointless. You wasted your own time and mine. And they were like, well, what would you say? And I'm like, okay, right? Like, da 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 da. I write a compelling email. So that's the thing. People are like, change is not just communication. And that's true. And a lot of change practitioners will like go cry about it. They'll be like, it's not a communication plan. I'm like, well, obviously it's not just a communication plan. because then when someone brings me a crappy email, I'm like, if you're this bad at communicating your project or your idea or whatever, let me actually see the project. Let me see the decision that you made, because you're not thinking about your audience. It's not just that you're not a good writer or communicator. It's that like, you don't understand your audience at all if this is how you're sharing this. And then they would say, oh, I decided that I'm going to do this thing because I saw someone blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not how we make decisions. And then that's when I realized that this was like a whole thing. It's like, it's the entire problem solving. And that's another reason that I don't separate project management. And I don't think that leaders should either separate project management from change management. So often people will be like, change management is the people side, is moving people through a change. And management is the project side. And I'm like,
Who does the projects?
I have no idea how. I really don't. I'm like, I know a lot about traditional change management, obviously. I'm like, why would you have a project idea and then when do the people come in? I'm like, first, it's all the same project. So it used to really confuse me when project managers would come in and be like, hey, we're moving forward with this thing. So like, what about the people side of stuff? And I'm like, what is this? Like, you're not change managing me very well right now. But that happens at huge organizations where they have a PMO office and they have a whole change management function and blah, blah, blah. And spoiler alert, it doesn't go over that well there either. Because I've also been at Fortune 100s, Fortune 50s, where they have all the resources in the world. And the end user is like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the end user too, that makes me think about like when, and you were talking about emails, you know, I send a lot of emails to like the community and things like that, but also marketing emails to customers because we have a lot of those like consumer product based companies in our community. And like, how does this apply to customers or like even consumers, like on the big, you know, all people are buying products kind of a scale? Because I feel like, you know, the brands in our community are creating products that are better for the planet and better for people, and really wanting to, especially with Brand Pollinators, we wanted to like help bring these brands together to kind of share insights and help get those stories out, help educate consumers. So like, can these strategies be like applied in that direction as well? Or like, what do you think would carry over in terms of communicating with consumers about like driving change in consumption habits?
Yeah. I do think that I think it's applicable because again, my like, you know, thesis of life is that all communication is change. So if you're doing PR, marketing, or customer service or anything, why are you doing that? Because someone's not buying something, not doing something, or they did something and you wanted them to do it again. You want them to repeat their behavior, right? So if you're doing a PR tactic like, oh, we need to get a press release or something, and I'm like, or we need to be on a certain social media channel, is the buyer there, right? Or what's the reason we're doing that thing? What's the strategy behind this tactic, right? And sometimes there is a strategy, like, okay, even if our consumer is not there, you know, other, you know, people who are covering impact brands are there or whatever, or that's how we have an audience so we can, you know, be at conferences or whatever. There just needs to be a strategy. So whatever happens, you just don't want to be screaming into the void, right? I feel like there's a lot of screaming into the void. It's hard if you have, and know whether or not you need to do like more traffic-based marketing. If you have like, if you're selling, you know, low cost, high volume, which a lot of, you know, CPG and things like that, like there's still a relationship component, right? if people are buying one time and not buying again, and you're like, well, the product must be bad, so now we have to go look at our recipe for our food or whatever it is. And I'm like, do you know that that's the problem? So we talk a lot about solving for the right problem and how we get to that problem. Like that is, at the end of the day, that is what I do, is solve for problems and then communicate them. And your marketing and your PR and anything external where you're talking to your customers or collaborators or consumers at large, like that, you should be doing behavioral change work in order to do that. And you see this a lot with like plant-based foods or something like that. Like, okay, who's eating them? Who's eating them again? Who's eating them and why? Are we trying to change meat eaters to eat, plant-based meats? Or are we trying to make vegans and vegetarians realize that there's something that might taste like their childhood on the shelves? Like who are we talking to? What's the messaging? What are we trying to get them to do? And is that communication actually getting them to change their behavior? If it's not, don't do that anymore. Like that's another thing. They'll be like, we're doing this campaign. You can't change it up too much before you measure it, but like, don't when the margins are thin, especially, like you can't keep doing something that doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like this, yeah, it's such a hard challenge because like you said, I mean, I think it's a good example with the plant-based meats is like, who is this for exactly? Because we're not always clear on that specific example. And then like what do we expect? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to keep coming back to buy it? And then is it like, I don't know, I'm thinking about the collaboration between companies too. Like, what does plant-based even mean? Like, what are we communicating with other plant-based companies? And, how are we educating people, but also how are we reaching the people that are going to be most impacted? And so maybe that's like another thing to consider too, is like brands that are impact driven are trying to like a lot of times reach consumers that are already buying products like that or already really conscientious about their purchases. But I think those like change management strategies could help support like a bigger shift in people that maybe aren't already aware of that, but like how to sort of connect with those groups that like you said, when you're the leader of a project and you already understand why you're doing it, it's kind of the same thing. Like you're going with the low hanging fruit of like trying to connect with people that sort of already get it. But it's like a much bigger challenge to reach out to this much broader audience that may not even have any concept of like what you're offering.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I actually talk about this with branding consultants who do brands a lot, is I'm like, please tell me that when you're doing a rebrand or building a brand that you have an employee strategy for this rebrand. Like your employees are your number one brand champions, and that's the same for your current customer. So like getting current customers, the strategy used to re-engage current customers should be even stronger than the one that you're using to reach new customers. And it shouldn't just be buy this again. It should be buy this again and tell someone. Like, how are you literally building people who are engaged with your work? Because that is change as well. People like, it's a change to eat something or use something and move on to the next thing that I'm doing with my day. It's a change to eat something or use something and then take action in order to like share that with someone or, reinforce, tell someone about it, right?
Yeah. Or like make it part of your daily
right
habits.
Just not something I grabbed one time or whatever. Yeah. How is this becoming, and especially with impact brands, like leveraging that idea that this is a lifestyle for people rather than just like use it and throw it away and forget about it. It's something that I think these businesses miss out on a lot, or they use these kind of like blast strategies when they could be using more of this relationship building strategy to change.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Well, we only actually have a few minutes left. Does anybody have any specific questions for Caitlin while we have her? I know we've covered a lot, but I think there's big themes between like scalable strategy and connecting with people. But if you have any specific questions about a change that you're looking to make, or advice for maybe a change that's already happened and you're like wondering how to go from here, please feel free to either come off mute or pop a question in the chat for us. And then we'll make sure that we get that answered, because we only have a few minutes left and I want to make sure that we are getting your questions answered. So anybody have anything specific? Okay, we have something in the comments. We're going through some internal reorganization. However, leadership isn't leaning on the expertise of the individuals on our team that has specific change management experience. And as a result, it's chaotic. How do we get leadership to invest time and effort in change management rather than just doing it? That's a great question.
I get this question every single time. How do we change the leaders who we want to do change better? So that is change management, right? So I would say if someone has change management expertise, their first change management project is to change the leader's behavior, which is the question you just asked. So I would concentrate on that more than the project itself to start. And changing a leader is the exact same way you change anybody else, except they have more power than you. It's figuring out what matters to them and connecting what you want to what they want. So what matters to them is, you're like, well, they want the project to go well. I'm like, well, if they just wanted the project to go well, they would simply recognize that the resources they needed were right in front of them. So that's actually not their number one motivation. What is their number one motivation? I don't know these people, so I can't tell you necessarily, but I would get a coffee, sit down together and be like, who do we actually need to change? Who can change them? And this is one of the questions that we had talked about as well, is the sphere of influence. If you are unable to influence this leader in the way that you need to, who can? So like, we do this a lot in diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. If the CEO is like, I don't care about diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm like, who here does? Who has it here? Right? And what do we need to do to get that person to help out?
Follow up here, she said, in this case, it's finances. So the COO is the one that cares most about the bottom line.
Right. So I mean, it's how is it? I would say, like, doing change well is better for the bottom line. So how are you going to have her understand that or see that aspect? And she might say, whatever, I can't put resources up front, like, then you say, hey, we have a strategy that's, resource light, and this is the exact way it needs to happen. Or like, what's going to make her change her mind? Right? Like, she cares more about the bottom line. Like, they don't want to pull this person off what they're currently doing to help out with the change because they're doing something. Like, we just need to figure, if you know what the person's motivation is, then we need to figure out what's going to change their behavior.
Or maybe other people that they work closely with around them. Yeah.
Right.
Them as well. Yeah, that's tough.
Again, just if you can't, someone sit down with her and be like, hey, I see the future. I see this train wreck or this not going as well as it could. And I have ideas, like, what do you think about that? I want to like, if I don't know someone's deal, I have to ask them, because thinking about what their deal is not as effective as them voicing exactly what it is,
Mhm.
and then using their words against them to win in a nice
In a nice way.
way.
Yeah, no, but it's so true. I mean, it's like basic psychology, which, you know, unfortunately we are like having to use all the time in change and in branding and marketing and advertising and all kinds of things. But yeah, it's like people want to believe that their idea is the best idea, or they want to hear that, you know, they're doing well, or, you know, that they're appreciated. And so it's like, what are these ways that we can connect with people and help them feel included too? Because it's like, you know, you're not coming at them like, oh, you're not doing change right and we needed to intervene. It's like, I want to learn from you, and yeah, I want to work together to like make this work.
Yeah.
So
If she cares about the bottom line and you're seeing chaos, what are the impacts of that chaos that either she sees and is like, maybe no one else thinks this is a problem, and you're like, it is, right? Because whatever this reorg is causing chaos, and chaos is expensive.
yeah, it all really comes down to communication, just like opening those lines for sure. Oh, Nick has a question. Do you have any practical tips to make change stick or to keep it from rolling back after it's already been implemented?
Yeah. If something is new, integrating it into established systems and processes, or more organic things that like already happen at your organization, is like the best way to do it. You can think of it as like braiding the change into the fabric of the organization. So that's why change doesn't stick a lot, because they're like, we're going to do this thing, and then 3 months, we're going to remind everyone to keep doing it. And 3 months later, we're going to remind everyone to keep doing it again. And I'm like, okay, because we've overlaid this new process on top of everything else. So whatever the change is, where can you reinforce it in existing infrastructure of the organization? And that can be, right, it's a little bit like change dependent where that actually shows up. And even if it doesn't like function in a way that you can integrate the change itself, it's like, how do you integrate the reinforcement communication into existing processes rather than like and that goes for implementing change as well. People are like, I'm going to start a newsletter for my new thing. And I'm like, don't start a new newsletter for your new thing. Don't do it. Like,
Yeah, I was about to ask about like if you ever use any sort of like rewards, incentives or anything for, but I think you just kind of answered that as like, if you do that already, then it can be part of what you're doing, but don't like institute a new system
thing. A
just
new thing. I know people are like, we're going to do this new thing and we're going to use a new way to do it. And then you're like, Caitlin, using change management is a new way. And I'm like, no. Technically, we're all doing change management all the time. We're just doing it crappy. So we're going to do what we're already doing better. But yeah, they're like, we're going to do a new reward, a new point system for our new thing that we want everyone to do. And I'm like, oh my God, like, don't double change people.
Yeah.
Whenever possible.
Mm-hmm. I'm the worst at that. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make a change. Actually, I'm gonna make 40 changes.
I know. Oh, I get it. I would be like, my team always used to come up with the most wonderful ideas for double changes. And I was like, I'm so sorry to crush your dreams. And then I had to be like, this is never gonna, I can't say this is never gonna work, right? Because I need them to be on my side all the time. So yeah. Like half the time I like don't even want people to like know that change is like I want people like, of course that change. I'm sure I already knew all about this. And I'm like, you did already know all about it, because I've been weaving it into everything for 6 months. So then when the announcement happens, you already know it. It's fine. Right. that's a good change. People are like, the status quo, isn't this thing already my new normal? And
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my God, we did such a good job.
Yes. Yes, that makes so much sense. And that's why I feel like it's really jarring, like when I hear about like a bunch of layoffs, or like the big news in CPG lately was like a big retailer, well, small retailer, but one of the retailers that's really popular with the smaller brands just like closed its doors and put up a sign. Like the day they made the announcement, all the stores were closed. Like the employees didn't even know it was coming. And it's just like that stuff, it just
I
seems
know.
so out of the blue. Like, who was talking about this? Like three people behind closed doors, it's just like
I
where do you
know.
get other people in on this?
People are like, well, it's a bad thing. So that's the
They
other
don't want to hide it.
bad thing that's happening. And so it must be done badly. I'm like, where's the compassion?
Mhm.
Where's the compassion in that strategy? You
Well,
can,
and also like, I mean, it can be like, obviously, closing stores is a bad thing, but I mean, there's different angles to look at it. And if
right.
you frame it as like, this is terrible and we're just gonna rip the Band-Aid off, then
Yeah, I'm like, don't do terrible things in a terrible way. Right. Say this is the dawning of a new era and we're gonna blah blah blah. And we've done like there's so many different ways to do it. And people are like, it's a secret. And I'm like, but what's a secret? Right?
yeah,
Is
well, and like
closing a secret? Like, you
if you
know,
put that out on the table, then like maybe there's solutions that exist within those teams, or like in this case, the store employees, or those brands that are part of it. Like how how can they contribute to envisioning a different outcome, or making that transition in a different way, rather than just like a small group of people thinking, well, this is the only way to do it and it's gonna suck.
yeah. Whenever I will say one more thing. Whenever someone comes to me with a change they already have in their brains, my first question is like, why? Like, kindly show me your work. Like, explain the reasoning here. Oh, what's the purpose of that? Oh, what were you thinking to come up with that conclusion? Da, 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 da. And I should probably pull stats on this, but half the time, whatever we do is not what they thought first. That's why I'm like,
Yeah.
creating, navigating, and communicating changes are so important. The creation of the change is that navigating change or communicating change that happens after you create. So exactly what you said. Maybe that wasn't even what you should have done. And you don't know because you didn't approach it in that way. Right.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's like, I think that's a good place to close too, because what the why behind, why do you want to do this? Why are people resistant? You know, like I think that's such an important thing to just keep coming back to, and something that hopefully people can take away from this, no matter what kind of change that they're expecting or not expecting to come, is that, yeah, looking at the different reasoning, and bringing people in to learn how it can be done in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we're at time now, so I think we're gonna have to call it quits on the questions, but if you have any other questions, what's a way people can reach out to you, Caitlin?
Yeah, comcotery.com. I mean, it's on YouTube. Like, you're gonna post this, so it'll be in the show notes. But yeah,
Yeah.
www.commcoterie.com. I also have a monthly change communication, or sorry, organizational change roundtable. We talk about creating, navigating, communicating change every month. The next one's this week, actually, on Thursday. But yeah, same thing. I do like a mini lesson about whatever my clients are going through right now, because then I assume that everyone's going through it, for small purpose-driven businesses. And then we do Q&A and people ask me good questions.
Okay, so if you have more questions Thursday, I just put the link in there.
Yeah.
Pop over and you can carry on the conversation. If you want to reach out to me for any follow-up, other questions, suggestions, recommendations, I'm Kate at brandpollinators.com. You can sign up for our email if you are not already at brandpollinators.com, and we'll make sure to include you in future community calls where we bring in guest experts like Caitlin and cover topics that can help you grow and scale your impact. So thanks, Caitlin, for being here. It was so amazing.
Thanks, Kate. Also, Caitlin.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming and have a great rest of your day.